This is Harsh Rules. I'm Ben Harsh, and today we're going to begin to learn to play the Hamilcar portion of Hannibal and Hamilcar. Hannibal and Hamilcar was designed by Mark Simonich and Yaro Andruskevich and published by Phalanx in 2018. This game requires 2 players and takes from 1 to 8 hours to play. While Hamilcar is marketed as a second game in this edition, this game incorporates many of the rules from Hannibal. Therefore, be sure you're familiar with all the rules from Hannibal before proceeding on with this series. So if you've watched those first 4 episodes in the tutorial series for Hannibal, it's time to jump in and begin learning to play Hamilcar. The Hamilcar scenario can be found on page 28 of the scenario book for the First Punic War. Following this scenario are many of the special rules for Hamilcar that you can reference during play. For our first task, we're going to prepare all the cards for the Hamilcar portion of the game. Therefore, locate the following card types. The strategy cards, they have an elephant on the back. The land battle cards, the ones with the crossed swords. The naval tactics cards, these have an octopus on the back. And the general cards, the blue ones are for Carthage and the red ones are for Rome. Once you've gathered all these decks, you will only need specific cards for this scenario. To prepare the strategy card deck for Hamilcar, you will need cards 75 through 110. A quick note, cards number 92 through 110 have the ship icon in the lower left-hand corner. Cards 75 through 91 do not. However, you will need all of these cards to play the Hamilcar scenario. Next, collect all 48 land battle cards and shuffle them into a deck. After that, collect all 18 naval tactic cards and shuffle them into their own deck. Finally, take the Carthaginian and Roman general cards and select all the cards that have a ship icon in the lower left-hand corner. There are also 2 Roman generals without symbols on their cards. For Hamilcar, players should include Q. Fulvius Flaccus and remove P. Cornelius Scipio. Once you've completed organizing your cards, it's time to set up the gameplay area. Hannibal and Hamilcar is 2 games in one. Each game's map is printed on one side of the game board. Therefore, place the game board with the Hamilcar side face up. Now, let's set up the gameplay area surrounding the board. First, place the deck of strategy cards, the deck of land battle cards, and the deck of naval tactic cards next to the board. After that, prepare stacks of markers that both sides will use during the game. This includes the 2 sides of influence markers, siege markers, and supply markers. Finally, place the game's dice in the same area for ease of use. For our next step, let's set up the Roman general cards. To prepare the Roman general cards, set aside the following 3 generals: Valerius Maximus, Claudius Caudex, and Fulvius Flaccus. Then shuffle the remaining Roman general cards into a deck and place it above the game board. Next, place the 3 generals that you set aside face up above the game board. To set up the Carthaginian general cards, remove the following cards from the deck and set them aside: Hanno, Gisco, Xanthippus, and Hamilcar Barca. Then shuffle the remaining Carthaginian general cards into a deck and place them on the mercenary pool spot on the game board. Next, place the cards for Hanno and Gisco along the bottom of the game board. Next, place the Hamilcar Barca general card on top of the deck in the mercenary pool. Finally, place the Xanthippus general card on top of the shuffled deck. And with that, the surrounding game area is set up and we can now draw our attention to setting up the game board. Now, let's discuss politics of the ancient world. Just like in Hannibal, Hamilcar has a political control track on the left side of the board. Let's walk through the political setup of each region on the track and the respective provinces on the game board. Let's begin with Africa. The first space on the Africa section of the track is for the Miat. The Miat was historically known as Carthage's Council of 104. Mia means 100 in Phoenician. The Miat served a role for Carthage similar to the Senate for Rome, and like the Roman Senate, the Miat kept tight control of the Carthaginian military. The Carthaginian player will track their political control of the Miat on a special panel on the game board. If the player for Carthage can gain a majority on this panel, then they win the space on the political control track. For now, place one Carthaginian political control marker in the upper left-hand corner of the Miat. Also place the Lost Elephant Knowledge in the lower right-hand corner of the Miat. At this point in history, Carthage has lost their knowledge of how to use elephants in battle. Therefore, until that knowledge is regained, Carthage deducts 2 from each elephant charge die roll until Xanthippus enters the game. Xanthippus enters the game when enough political control markers have been spent on the Miat. The cost to recruit Xanthippus is indicated by the number in the blue sword icon on each turn. The Lost Elephant Knowledge marker is placed on the Miat as a reminder of this. Once Xanthippus enters the game, the Lost Elephant Knowledge marker is removed. The next space on the track is for Numidia. Numidia is currently controlled by hostile tribes. The next space is for Libya, which is completely under Carthaginian control. The final space in the Africa section is for Carthage, which has a large walled city. The next section of the political control track is for Italy, and we will begin with the Lucania space. Lucania is mostly under Roman control, but there is one hostile tribe there. After that is Apulia, which is under Roman control. Then Roman-controlled Campania. Neighboring this space on the game board is Samnium. However, you'll notice that Samnium is not listed on the political control track. Yaro Andruskevich, the co-designer, commented on this on Board Game Geek. The rationale for Samnium not counting for provincial points is that it is not touching the sea where the main struggle is occurring. And if you look at the map, this makes sense. It's on the wrong side of the peninsula and there are no sea lanes leading out from it to the rest of the map. So keep this exception in mind when tying out your political points with the game board. The next province that is on the political control track is Latium, which contains the large walled city of Rome. In Hamilcar, Rome has not yet developed towers on their large walled cities. So when playing, be sure to use the large walled city marker without a tower for Rome. And finally is Etruria, which is not under Roman control, only has one Roman political marker and one hostile tribe. After that on the political control track is a space for the islands of Sardinia and Corsica. These islands are both under Carthaginian control. Next up we have Sicily, which in Hamilcar is worth 3 points on the political control track. 1 point for controlling the large walled city of Syracuse, 1 point for controlling the majority of spaces in Sicily, which at the beginning of the game neither side has, and 1 point for controlling the walled city of Lilybaeum on the western end of Sicily. Finally, there is a space on the track for Naval Supremacy. Naval Supremacy is tracked with the colored trident marker. At the beginning of the game, Carthage has Naval Supremacy. Obviously, Hamilcar has a huge naval focus compared to Hannibal. In fact, many of the elements in Hannibal are flipped here in Hamilcar. For example, during the First Punic War, Rome as a nation is still developing their navy. Rome's naval experience is tracked by the seamanship panel on the upper right-hand side of the game board. Rome begins the game with poor seamanship, so place a political control marker on this space of the panel. This poor seamanship rating penalizes Rome in naval combat and storms. Rome's seamanship can be improved, though, by playing specific event cards. While discussing the sea, let's also set up the naval warships for each side. In Hamilcar, warship markers have 2 sides. One side indicates the warship is ready. The other side of the marker shows that the warship is spent. This is indicated by a colored band at the bottom of the marker. ready ships can be used in battle. When ships become damaged, they become spent. Spent ships will cost 1 operation point to refit to ready status again. For setup of each side's warships, Rome has 1 ready warship, and Carthage has 1 ready warship and 2 spent warships. Next, let's set up the generals and their forces for each side, starting with Carthage. First, place 1 combat unit on its own in Agrigentum. Next, place 2 combat units, 1 supply train, and H. Gisco in Lilybaeum. Following this, place 3 combat units, 1 elephant combat unit, 2 supply trains, and Hanno in Carthage. Next, place 1 combat unit in Corrales, 1 combat unit in Lipara, then place Xanthippus with 1 elephant combat unit on top of the Xanthippus general card. Finally, place 1 combat unit on the last space of the turn track. All remaining Carthaginian generals are placed on the turn track as follows. Place the turn marker on the first space of the track. Place the version of Hamilcar being shown on the screen on the second space on the track. On the third space, place Hasdrubal. The fourth space, Carthalo. Fifth, Adherbal. Sixth, Himilco. And seventh, this version of Hamilcar Barca. Managing generals can be a complex affair for the Carthage player. Similar to Rome, in Hamilcar, Carthage rotates generals every turn at the whim of the Miat, aka the Council of 104. Carthage can field a minimum of 2 generals. The first general is drawn from the Carthaginian general deck in the mercenary pool. The second general is taken from the turn track for that particular turn. There are opportunities to add 2 more generals by placing political control markers on the Miat. These generals are also drawn from the mercenary pool. There is a third type of general that, to keep things simple, we will just call great generals. These are the generals whose cards are turned face up in the mercenary pool, Xanthippus and Hamilcar Barca. These generals can essentially be purchased by taking political control markers you've placed from the Miat panel. The purchase price in political control markers for each of these great generals is indicated by the number in the blue sword icon on each turn space. As each turn passes in the game, the price for these great generals drops. By meeting the blue sword cost, first Xanthippus can be brought into the game, and when Xanthippus is displaced and removed from the game, essentially he dies, then Hamilcar Barca becomes available to purchase. For whatever reason, if the Carthage player cannot meet the price, then Hamilcar Barca will enter the game on turn 7. Now let's place the starting generals and forces for Rome. Rome begins the game with 2 consuls and 1 proconsul in play. The first consul is Valerius, with 6 combat units and 1 supply train in Rome. The second consul is Claudius, with 2 combat units and 1 supply train in Messana. Also place 4 combat units on their own across the Strait of Messana in Rhegium. Finally, Rome has a proconsul, Flaccus, with 3 combat units in Cosa. Before we move on, let's pause for a moment and get a better understanding of Hamilcar's theater. Hamilcar takes place from 264 BC to 241 BC. The First Punic War ends roughly 20 years before the events from Hannibal take place. Taking into account this earlier time period, Hamilcar comes with a number of changes to the gameplay. First, Hannibal's epic flanking maneuver through the Alps is not an option here. Both land routes in and out of Africa and Italy are clearly out of bounds for this game. This leaves the Mediterranean between the 2 ancient superpowers as the primary battlefield. While Hannibal utilized an abstract naval movement and battle mechanic, Hamilcar presents a fully realized map with an intricate network of sea lanes. These sea lanes are further enriched with distinct weather patterns represented by lightning bolts for storms that can be triggered with event cards. This heavy naval focus also reflects interesting historical dynamics between both nations. At this point in history, Rome has little experience with the sea. The farthest Rome has progressed is to cross the Strait of Messina into Sicily. Essentially anything south of this is completely unexplored for Rome, including Africa. For Rome, just crossing the Mediterranean to Africa is a huge endeavor. This general inexperience will be reflected in some of Rome's game components a little bit later in the tutorial. As a result, Sicily is now the stepping stone to Africa, and Sicily, both historically and in this game, will be the focus of much of the conflict. All of this is in stark contrast to Hannibal, where Rome had complete mastery of the seas, and Carthage took huge risks whenever they wanted to cross. In Hamilcar, Carthage has greater experience with the sea and begins the game with naval superiority. Hamilcar will allow you to connect the dots and see Rome begin the game with inexperience and slowly develop their skills until they're able to take over the Mediterranean. With all that said, despite the differences, much of Hamilcar's gameplay remains from Hannibal. Therefore, I will not rehash everything from Hannibal, but highlight variances from the original and focus on the mechanics unique to this game. So please keep that in mind as we work through these tutorials for Hamilcar. This concludes the first episode of our tutorial series on Hamilcar from Hannibal and Hamilcar by Phalanx. In the next episode, we will look at revisions to the phases of gameplay. Following that, we will cover off on the game's extensive naval movement and combat rules. Questions about this game, requests for future Harsh Rules game tutorials, and constructive feedback are all greatly appreciated. Drop a line in the comments section. To be the first notified when this episode and any Harsh Rules episode is placed online, please subscribe to this channel. Until then, I'm Ben Harsh for Harsh Rules. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next episode.